Yo, yo, yo. All right, moving on, yo. We left off with one of the exceptions. We talked about one of the exceptions, which was the 129 exception, which is kind of like a promissory estoppel one. Now we'll go into 130, and 130 is it's defining something, and then we'll talk about the writing part. So that's kind of a big part. And that's going to be 131 through 134. Okay. So starting with 130, specifically with contracts that cannot be performed in a year. And so giving a little bit more definition here, because if you recall, right, one of the ways to see if a contract falls within the statute of frauds is that if the contract cannot, well, actually, you'll see in what I'm going to say, but it cannot be performed within a year. Okay. Very specific language I chose to use there. Okay. But the language of Restatement 130 is where any promise in a contract cannot be fully performed within a year, cannot be fully performed within a year. From the time the contract is made, all promises in the contract are within the statute of frauds until one party to the contract completes its performance. Okay. So, um, in short, cannot be fully performed. So this does mean that if there's a contract that says like mow the lawn by the end of the year, right? That doesn't, or by the end of 2 years, that doesn't count because full performance could have been within the year, right? But if it's employment for 2 years, like you literally can't fulfill that part of that promise unless you stay for 2 years, right? It can't be performed within a year. And so that would fall under the statute of frauds. Subsection 2 of 130, when one party to a contract has completed his performance, the 1 year provision of the statute does not prevent enforcement of the promises of the other parties. These 1 year contracts cannot be fully performed in a year, then it counts under the statute of frauds. When one party to a contract has completed his performance, does not prevent enforcement. Yeah, so hold on, does this run counter to what I just said? One party to a contract has completed their performance. The statute does not prevent enforcement of the promises of the other party. These 1 year contracts cannot be fully performed within the context of the statute of frauds. Yeah, I think that's consistent, right? Just because you get it done, if the contract says kind of, yeah, kind of, sort of. We'll revisit that. Maybe this is time for reflection for me. Okay, 131 through 134. Okay, we're just gonna forget this little mishap. And moving on to, well, last time we talked about one of the exceptions. Well, now the question is, well, what counts as sufficient writing? Okay, is sufficient writing just a contract in which I signed and you signed, right? Does it need to have the terms in there? What about things that are not in formal writing? It's like your signature, right? Can it be in, or sorry, your initials, right? Can it be in more than one piece of writing? Does it even have to be on paper? Right. 131. The language here says, unless additional requirements are prescribed by the particular statute by a given jurisdiction. So for instance, if New York wanted to say you need more than just what the statute of fraud or what the restatements say, then they can do that. A contract within the statute of frauds is enforceable if it is evidenced by any writing signed by or on behalf of the party to be charged with. Okay. So note here, any writing. So, right, some things that poking in your mind. Oh, it doesn't sound like it's limited to just like this you know, this document that looks like the Declaration of Independence, right? It could be maybe any kind of form of writing. And it doesn't necessarily also have to be by the principal. It could be through an agent or a fiduciary. So which A, reasonably identifies the subject matter of the contract. Okay, so you need that. It needs like if the writings, they have to relate to each other. And so it can't be, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit because I'm implying that you can use multiple writings, which you can. The contract itself has to bring up the subject matter. And so if you put your signature and they put their signature on it, it has to relate to the good or the whatever is being the subject of the contract, right? It can't just be some random thing that they put down and then like said, oh, the signature counts. B is sufficient to indicate that a contract with respect thereto has been made between the parties or offered by the signer to the other party. It has to identify that both people were in agreement of this contract. And so generally speaking, this means that both people signed. Okay. And C states with reasonable certainty that the essential terms of the unperformed promise of the unperformed promises in the contract. It has to hint at, it has to allude, not just allude, it has to be pretty certain of the big terms of the contract. And so this is out of order, but if you wanted to put it in a different way, you could say it needs to be in writing, okay? It needs to be signed by or on behalf of the party. Let me put another thing here. Signed by both. Okay, it needs to be both. And 3, it reasonably identifies the subject matter, okay? Cool. Also, restatement 132, right? This, where we kind of are assuming that it has to be on one document, which I kind of hinted that this exists here. But 132 says that, well, a memo, the requirements of the written portion, right? The written portion here is a sufficient writing, can be more than one document. The language of it states, the memorandum may consist of several writings if one of the writings is signed and the writings and the circumstances clearly indicate that they relate to the same transaction. And so in other words, you can meet all these requirements in like hypothetically in 3 documents, right? If the writing, the reason I done, right? If the writing has like the subject thing or it was related to the subject, let's say it's the sale of a car, and it says, you know, Lamborghini on it, and it says the year, the make, and the model. And it has like the code of the car, you know what I'm saying? I don't know what the term of that is. And it was signed, and then on another thing, it said in relation to the Lamborghini, last 4 digits of the code, like it doesn't say the whole code, right? And then that was signed. And yeah, like that could work, right? Even though they're not the same, okay? And that was signed by both parties. Or like, let's say like one signed one thing and the other person signed the other thing, like you could join those together and Frankenstein of writing sufficient. 133, memorandums not made as such, okay? So except in the case of a writing evidencing a contract upon consideration of marriage, the statute may be satisfied by a signed writing not made as a memorandum of a contract. So in other words, the writing, unless it's the marriage one, which I mean, for our purposes, we don't even care. Like the writing doesn't necessarily have to like say everything explicit, as long as it's showing that this contract I had intent to like make it happen. So yeah, I mean, it kind of crazy to think about. In 134, signature, the signature to a memo may be any symbol made or adopted with an intention, actual or apparent, to authenticate the writing as that of the signer. So, in other words, it doesn't have to be a formal signature. Okay, so initials are kind of reminiscent of a signature, so that's kind of an easy example. But let's say it's a stamp, right? That could work, right? Not a signature, but it shows an intent to authenticate, right? Maybe I sent you a confirmation with like the letterhead that I only use for like deals, right? That could be an intent to authenticate, right? Let's say I have like this weird uh ritual in which I only sign the deals that I really want to in green pen. And it's like well known, that could in a court be like, I don't know why this works, but there's reasonable evidence to show that intent was there to authenticate. Um, yeah. So when you look at this right here and you run through your analysis, you have to ask yourself, like, sufficient writing is more squishy. Okay. And so the court case to kind of pull this and illustrate itself as well, I think best showcases itself in Crabtree versus Elizabeth Arden Sales Corp. And so this, if you recall, was the court case in which Arden, she was the CEO of a cosmetics company, and Crabtree was some dude that was not happy with a job and wanted to move on to the next best thing for him, and he turned to cosmetics, you know, and the contract said, you're going to work for, I believe, 2 years, and you're going to move up a pay scale when you hit certain time benchmarks. And no, they didn't sign that part. Nobody signed that part, but he took the deal. He just said, yes, I'm going. And then later on, he signed, I believe there were time cards or pay stubs or something of that nature, which kind of showed his pay grades. And so he signed that, and it was from the company. And so now we ask ourselves, like, well, that sounds like it's not sufficient, right? But actually, it was sufficient. One, the UCC doesn't apply, but it does apply to the statute of frauds because it's the 1 year plus. Like he can't do the performance of the contract unless it was 2 years, right? And so it does statute of frauds. So you run this analysis. Is there sufficient writing? And so because we piece together writings here, 131, 132, 134, 133, okay, the court found it sufficient. And so like enforceable contract, just like stop there. Like don't even ask yourself everything else. And I think that is a good way to think about it. Yeah, several writings and memos not necessarily part of the contract, but show intent, right? All of those things show intent. And so even though the contract was inside, the payroll thing will still show it. And so, running these for statements. All right, going on to the next, yo. Where's my end meeting button? There it is.